You're listening to India Bio Speaks, your one-stop resource for science, news, and careers. Welcome, listeners, to our next segment of Crafting Your Career in Science. I'm Lakshmi, and I'm your host for this episode. In this episode, we want to talk about a few critical aspects of being marketable in the job market and tooling up for a job interview. As you know, one of the most critical tools is to get a really good resume or CV prepared for the job hunt. And in order to dive into an in-depth discussion on these and maybe share a tip or two that we picked up along the way, joining me today are my colleagues Smita and Shreya. Welcome both.
Hi Lakshmi, it's good to be back.
Thanks Lakshmi. Looking forward to this chat today.
You know, listeners, both the resume and CV, as we said, are marketing tools that help highlight your skills, your talents, and the different work experiences that make you an excellent fit for the position for which you're applying. To begin with, we want to start by clearing two very common misconceptions about CVs and resumes. And the first is that CVs and resumes are not one and the same. They cannot be used interchangeably. While typically CV is used in an academic setting, in most other cases, you would want to use a resume, and that's what is typically requested. We will discuss more about each of these, how they're made, where they are used, and so on as we go along. And the second misconception that we want to clear is the purpose of a CV and a resume is not to get you a job, but to get you an interview.
That's well said, Lakshmi. So as she pointed out, CV and a resume indeed cannot be used interchangeably. That's something that we all must keep in mind. It is also important to keep in mind to tailor one CV or resume rather than send out one common document to everyone and for every other job that you're applying for, because the chances of rejection becomes extremely high when you do that. Based on the job that one's applying for, one needs to tailor these to match the requirements that are spelled out in the job ad.
But that's right, Smita. So what I think is, before we dwell on what makes a great CV or a resume, I think it would be worthwhile to spend a little time to talk about how to dissect a job ad and tease out the key attributes that an employer is looking for. Shreya, what are your thoughts on this?
So Lakshmi, I think it's a great idea to invest some time at the very beginning to figure out what exactly the employer is looking for and use this information to customize your application according to the employer's requirements. So an easy way to do this is to copy the ad, which might be really text heavy, copy it onto a word processor and highlight some of the key attributes that the employer seems to be looking for. And once you have identified these key attributes, you can rewrite them in simpler terms and come up with a list of keywords. So let's take an example. Let's say that the employer is looking for certain technical skills, or for someone who is a team player who has good communication skills, flexibility, leadership, time management, etc. So these are your keywords. Once you do this exercise, you may find that you actually have experience to showcase for each of these attributes. And from this, you can choose to highlight the most relevant ones for this job.
Well, while dissecting a job ad is a useful exercise, I think we should also be aware of that not all information can be obtained just from the advertisement which has been put out in the public domain and hence available to all applicants. Good networking skills can get you access to relevant and reliable private information on specifics that an employer is looking for in a candidate. So this is a very critical point that one must keep in mind. This could be details regarding the project involved that are not explicit in the job ad, the nature of the team, the work culture, all of which can help you craft your application that is more tailor-made, and hence it stands out from rest of the applications that the potential employer would have received.
True.
That's very true, Smita. So, having learned the requirements through two very important sources of information we've seen, which is number one, the job ad, and number two, through good networking skills, one then needs to make a good case for oneself. When in doing so, I really like the PAR or the STAR approach. These are acronyms, which both of which are widely acknowledged and very effective. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Great. Shreya, why don't you just elaborate about these further?
Okay. So PAR or PAR, it's an acronym for problem, action, and result. You may also have heard of STAR, which is a pretty similar concept. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So for every key attribute that you identified earlier in the exercise we just mentioned, what you will do now is you will jog through your memory and maybe pull out your old reports or think back to your whatever experience you have and think of a problem or a situation or a task. And using this, you have to think of three things. One, what was the problem that allowed you to demonstrate the attribute? Second, what action did you take to address the problem? And finally, what were the results of those actions and what were the benefits? So this basically is the PAR analysis. Once you have done this, you can then use action verbs to generate concise PAR statements.
That's an excellent way of going about it, Shreya. Lakshmi, would you mind sharing some of the examples of these action verbs? How would you actually use them in a PAR statement?
Sure, Smita. Examples are solved, adapted, developed, clarified, organized, guided, mentored, designed, approved, coached, planned, and so on. And it can be very impactful to begin your PAR statement with these action verbs. And when you do so, you should look to emphasize accomplishments rather than efforts. For example, the action verb identified, which indicates an accomplishment, is better than the verb investigated, which indicates effort. So an example of a PAR statement would be something like strategized using Google Analytics data from the websites administered, resulting in a 50% increase in audience engagement.
Absolutely. And if you can quantify your results, use numbers in the PAR statement, the more impactful it becomes.
Exactly.
So Lakshmi and Shreya, this is great, but it would be good to talk about its usage in a resume or a CV, because that will give more clarity on how a PAR statement can actually be used.
That's a good point, Smita. In order to what I call make a PAR-packed resume, what you can do is when you build sections in a resume or a CV, it would be great to add these PAR statements that we just discussed as bulleted entries.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And we will share a good way to do this just in a little bit.
Now that we've talked about dissecting a job ad and identifying key attributes sought by an employer and composing PAR statements for each of these attributes, let's come back to resumes and CVs where we started. How do they differ? These are some key questions. How do CVs and resumes differ? Where are they used? What goes into a CV and a resume? Is there a good way to systematize preparing tailor-made CVs and resumes while job hunting? Let's begin with the difference between a resume and a CV. Any guesses, Lakshmi and Shreya?
Sure, Smita. So while a CV is a document that details your academic and work history, a resume is more like a snapshot of what you have to offer to an organization or a company.
Good. And where do you think each is useful?
Smita, the CV is generally useful when one is seeking a job in an academic or a research community. A resume, on the other hand, is a targeted marketing tool that is specific to the job that's one is applying to. It's more compact with a greater focus on work experience. Where it is useful is in any other setting besides academic or a research setting, one would typically use a resume.
That's correct. So a CV is also a continuously evolving document and can be virtually unlimited, but should remain focused. That's the key. A resume is typically 1 to 2 pages. As a rule of thumb, one can add an additional page for every 7 years of experience. As was rightly stated, a CV is typically used when applying for faculty positions, research intensive positions, fellowships, grants, or awards. For everything else, unless specifically requested, one should use a resume.
Right, Smita. And another thing to keep in mind is that while both the CV and the resume are timeline documents, CV can be either chronological or reverse chronological. But a resume is always reverse chronological. That means it highlights the latest achievement first.
That's a very good point, Shreya. Lakshmi, what do you think should go into a resume?
Smita, in addition to some standard sections such as contact information, one's education and work experience, one can also include other sections that are relevant, and one can even name them responsive to the keywords that we saw can be gleaned from the job description. One may even include, for example, volunteer experiences if they can support the application. So a typical sections in a resume would be summary of qualification, professional profile, any industry-specific information if you're applying for the industry, selected publications or patents, service or leadership experiences can be valuable. You can state professional affiliations or associations. One can list honors and awards. If you're listing your presentations, make sure that they're selected presentations which make sense to the application. Like I said, voluntary activities that can support your case can definitely be a part of the resume. And your skills, relevant technical skills, language skills, or any other skills that make sense, and relevant trainings and certifications. While it is not necessary to include all of these sections, it would certainly help to include ones that make most sense to the position that one is applying to. And each of these sections can be populated with, the PAR statements that we discussed earlier as bulleted entries to highlight relevant experience and accomplishment. Now that should make a PAR-packed resume.
Excellent. And what about CVs?
So Smita, in addition to the required categories that Lakshmi just talked about, like contact information, education, work experience, a CV can also include an exhaustive list of all your achievements, which you typically wouldn't include in every resume. Some examples are all the grants you have got funded, clinical certifications, teaching or mentoring positions, service or leadership activities, any professional affiliations or associations, invited presentations or seminars or poster presentations, even patents, and a complete list of your publications.
Thanks, Shreya. I want to share a very neat and efficient system to have in place while applying for jobs. And this is something that I learned as a postdoctoral fellow. And this is to prepare what's called a master resume, which is an exhaustive list of categories that we discussed, already populated with pre-crafted PAR statements as bulleted entries. And from this master resume, one can derive several targeted resumes that are tailor-made and responsive to each job ad. Yet another idea is to have what's called a smart resume, and you may wonder what that is. So what a smart resume is a business card style resume, which has your contact information in the front and either a short URL or a short link or a QR code to a generally targeted resume at the back. You can also include some online profiles or portfolios that you may have if you're applying for any sort of positions for which it could be useful, like your art portfolio or your online profiles, like your Google Scholar profiles, short link to your LinkedIn profile. All of this could be included. And when you have a business card like this, and it's very common for us to exchange business cards in social mixers during networking events, So whenever you are in such a situation and you meet potential job leads, you may use these to hand over your business card, but actually your resume to that job lead.
That sounds neat, Lakshmi. Listeners, in the description section of this podcast, you will find some worksheets that you can use to, one, dissect the job ad, to compose PAR statements. Also, there will be an example of a master, targeted, and a smart resume. Please do check them out and feel free to use them as needed, and do let us know how you used them.
Thanks, Shreya. And also, we would like to reiterate that our intent is not to present to you a model resume or a CV, or for that matter, share any templates, but to inspire you to come up with your own style, while following, of course, some basic accepted standards, and work around these standards to make the best case for yourselves. We have also attached a link to NIH's guide for resumes and CV, which we think you might find very useful.
Also, do check out our in-house publication, Dissect, which is a career resource book written by Dr. Suman Govil for life science and biotech students, which also has a lot of information that we three are sure that you all will find very, very useful. You will find a link to this in the description section of this podcast as well. Let us know for sure your comments and feedbacks and any suggestions or ideas that you may have on what more we can discuss and talk about. Do stay tuned to more episodes in the future on professional networking, interviewing skills, professionalism, and much, much more.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you, Smita. This was a fun-filled chat and definitely resourceful, I hope, to all of you that are listening. We hope to see you next time. And until then, stay safe in this crazy COVID-19 times that we are recording this episode. And do keep listening whenever you get the chance, and subscribe to our season on crafting your career in science. If you're passionate about scientific research, communication, outreach, and science education as we are, please connect and engage with us, and here are some ways that you can do so.
Visit our website at www.indiabioscience.org.
Subscribe to our newsletters.
Write for us and join our online discussion forum at discuss.indiabioscience.org.
Advertise jobs, grants and events in the life sciences on our website.
And feel free to contact us anytime at hello@indiabioscience.org.
Until next time, enjoy your science and stay engaged to enable change.